So this whole idea here, this into that whole thing is that F melodic minor. And then after that, it goes to, and that's over the F minor chord. Then it goes to the C minor chord, where it goes. Okay, now that section, if you think of it, is when he goes down here, that's a very chromatic-y kind of thing to do. He's doing, he does that pull-off again from the 9 to the 7 on the G string, then the 8 to the 7, which we talked about before, of the D string. Then he goes from the 10 to the 9 of the D string. So all on the D string, it's 8, 7, 10, 9. So you have. Then he goes down to the 10th fret of the A string. So very chromatic. It's all these 4 notes. Then he slides up from the 7th fret of the G string to the 8th fret of the G string. Then he plays the 8th fret of the B string, to the 11th fret of the B string, to the 8, 9, 10 of the E string. So that whole thing is. And then he slides, then he goes up to the 13th fret of the E string, back to the 10th fret of the E string. So that whole thing. Then he goes down to the B string, 11 and 12th fret. Then he goes down from the E string, from the 10 to the 9th fret. Then he goes down to the 11th fret of the B string. So that whole thing slowly is. Then he goes down to the 8th fret of the E string, back down to that 11th fret. So he's pivoting off of from the 9th fret to the 11, 9, or 8 to 11. I don't know if I said he slides from the 10 to the 9, then the 11, then 8, 11. So. Then he just walks down a pentatonic scale from the 11 to 8 on the B string to the 10 to the 8 on the G string to the 10 on the D string. So that whole phrase is. Then he starts doing this cool little phrase, which is he's pulling off from the 10th fret to the 8th fret on the G string, and he's pushing the whammy bar down when he hits that first note, and pulls up right before he pulls off. And he does that 4 times. So that's. Then after that 4th time, he plays the 9th fret of the G string, bends that up a half step, maybe a whole step, a half step, bends it up, and then he plays the 10th fret of the D string. So that whole thing. Then he goes down this little idea here, which is basically flat 5 intervals if you're going up. So you have the 10th fret on the D string to the 9th fret on the A string, then the 9th fret on the A string to the 8th fret of the E string. So that's. And again, he puts that he puts the bar into it right before he plays that first note. Then he goes down to the 6th fret of the E string, and And he does that again with the bar, a slight depression before he hits it. And then he bends the note up a half step. Now, if we analyze what's going on with this whole thing, if you think of just your C minor pentatonic, when he goes up this note, slides up there, he's starting on the 9th, basically, and slides into that minor third of the pentatonic. Then he just goes up without hitting that note there. It's just minor pentatonic. Then he goes up chromatically from the root to the flat 9 to the 9. So it's... Then he goes to the 4th, which is... You know where that note comes from. Now, this chromatic stuff can be thought of, you know, if you know... Stevie Ray does that kind of stuff. All the great blues player, they play off of that, the root, the flat 9, and that 9th note. Stevie Ray likes to do the double stops with that. Anyway, so that's where all that's coming from. Then he goes up to this note, which is in the pentatonic scale. And that's all in the pentatonic scale. But then he introduces this, which is the major 7. And he slides down from the 9 to the flat 9 to the 7 to the root. So that's where that little chromatic movement comes in. It sounds more chromatic than it is, but it's just adding that, the major 7 and the flat 9, which, if you look at this pentatonic scale, that's the root. It's that half step above, half step below. That's your flat 9, major 7, and your root. And that's where that chromatic sound comes from. So then he just walks down C minor pentatonic scale, basically. All this is C minor pentatonic. Then when he gets into that bend here, that's actually over the A flat dominant 7 chord. And he's basically bending that note up to the major 6th and coming down to the 3rd, the major 3rd of A dominant 7. Then when he does this, that's also over that A dominant chord, which this is the major 3rd and the flat 7, which are important notes in making a dominant 7 chord, your major 3rd, minor 7. Then the next chord goes down to a G altered chord, and that's where he plays this note, which is the 9th fret on the A string to the 8th fret to the 6th fret of the E string, and that's your major 7 of G, very dissonant to this note, which is your 4th or 11th of G. And then he goes to here and bends up a half step, which is basically your minor 3rd going up to a major 3rd of G. So again, I know some of you might be like, man, you talk a lot, which is very true. But I've had so many people in all these lessons that we've done comment about, I love the fact that you go so in depth in this, and the fact that you're telling all these details, because this is helping further my musical knowledge and all that kind of stuff. So this is how I like to teach. This is how I liked to be taught when I was taught from private lessons and stuff. And so I apologize if I go too much into depth, but a lot of people seem to be getting a lot of use out of this. So I will continue. But I'll try and speed this up at this point. With that being said. Anyway, so the next section it actually goes back to the C minor chord after the... And what it does, it walks up this. Now, what all that is, it's going back to that diminished idea, which is bringing triads up flat fives, up in a flat fifth, or in a tritone, whatever you want to call it. So that's basically, this is essentially a G major triad. It's 3rd fret on the E string, 7th fret on the E string, 5th fret on the A string, and 5th fret on the D string. Then the next one, you just bring that shape up on 1 string and up a half step. So then you do that again, up at 1 string and a half step. But instead of rolling your finger like this, you got to bring that up a half step because the way it's tuned. And then you do that again on the next string. So we'll go over that real quick. 3rd fret E string, 7th fret E string, 5th fret, 5th fret on the A and D string. The next one is 4th fret on the A string, 8th fret on the A string, 6th fret and 6th fret on the D and G string. Then 5th fret on the D string, 9th fret on the D string, 7th fret on the G string, 8th fret on the B string. And then the 6th fret on the G string, 10th fret on the G string, 9th fret and 9th fret on the B and E string. So that's... Now what he does here, though, to make it sound a little hipper, is he throws in a flat 9 on each one of those chords. So you have... So it's sliding that first note up a half step on each one of those phrases. So it's... And actually this phrase starts out with an open string. So after you have it goes... and again, those arpeggios, it's basically just a G major arpeggio to a D flat major arpeggio, or you can call it a C sharp major arpeggio. So, all right, so then it goes, after it gets into that section, it gets into this kind of whammy bar-y kind of double stop thing. And that's just your first finger on the 8th fret of the E string and your... I'm sorry, actually before he gets into that, he goes... He plays a double stop here on the 10th fret on both the B and E string. So he slides up after that arpeggio. He slides those two notes up a half step to the 10th fret. And then he plays this double stop with your first finger on the E string 8th fret, second finger is on the 9th fret of the B string, and you bend that up a half step. Then you bend it back down, and you pull off from the 9th fret to the 8th fret on the B string. So, and then you just run down from the 10, 8, 10, 8, 10, 8 on the G, D, and A string. So that whole thing is... Then he does that again, but instead of doing this double stop here, he does the first finger on the B string and the third finger on the 10th fret, first finger on the 8th fret of the B string, and then 10th fret of the B string with your third finger. But this time he only runs down these two strings, the G and the D string. So the first one is... then the second one is... Then the third one, he does it again. Then he hammers on from that pull-off of 10, 8, back to 10 on the D string. And here he uses the whammy bar with the 8th fret on the G string, 10th fret on the G string, bend up a half step with the whammy bar, and then back down to the 10th fret, all on the G string. And then he pulls off from the 10 to 8, 10, 8, 10, 8 on the G, D, and A string. I know that was a lot of running through that, but it's really a quick kind. It's really a simple kind of thing. And it's something typical that Scott Henderson does. He'll take a phrase and he'll really work it, but he won't do it the same each time. He does it just slightly different. And also, if you notice, I'm using the whammy bar on a lot of the stuff. So right there, I'm bending down a little bit. And here he shakes that note before he goes down. And briefly, what this is, again, it's the pentatonic with that 6th, basically. So you have your pentatonic, and instead of playing this minor 7, you're playing the 6. Even when you're bending up from this note to the 6. So that's all that is. All right, let's move on to the next section.